The events of that Saturday in Lewisham did little to improve relations between the black community and the police.
You could start to imagine that some people would have seen us as the protectors of the National Front. You know, we had no option. You know, they were not committing offences. They were, you know, doing something that, you know, traditionally we've grown to expect to be able to do. But, you know, we were deeply offended that we were used, and we were used, of course, and the people of Lewisham were used by that extreme political body.
In the bloody aftermath of Lewisham, however, the National Front's leaders felt vindicated.
We'll carry on marching like a great army towards the Britain of our dreams!
The day's events showed up the left wing for what they are, showed the kind of people who were opposed to us, and I know members of the party of that time who said to me afterwards, when I joined the party, I thought possibly it was a little bit too extreme. But having seen what you're up against, I don't think that at all anymore.
In the wake of the National Front march, firebomb attacks on black-owned properties in the area further heightened tensions. And then came the bleakest moment in a decade of alienation and bitterness. On the 17th of January 1981, in a house on New Cross Road, youngsters gathered to celebrate the 16th birthday of Yvonne Ruddock.
It was my brother's girlfriend, who was Yvonne Ruddock. It was her 16th birthday party, and I tagged along basically because we were all friends together, you know what I mean.
It started off as a small party, and it just escalated into this great big party, and hey, I don't know where people were coming from, because there was people from all over the country, people from Rugby, there was people from East London, North London, West London. I
was only 11, so I wouldn't say I'd frequent, you know what I mean, all-night parties, but as far as it goes, yeah, it was a normal night. In fact, it was, you know, we were all enjoying ourselves, you know.
I decided I'm going to come down and go and get me a drink. And I've come down the stairs, and as I'm coming down the stairs, I've seen smoke just coming from all underneath the door and everything else. Shouted fire, and I've turned around, I've sort of run back upstairs.
When the young guy came out and shouted fire, it was like a shock, and I think everyone's instant reaction was like, fire, you know, sort of thing.
I lived on Alpha Road, which is directly adjacent to where the party was. And as I turned the corner, I realised that there was kids, really, you know, younger than I was, jumping out of the window, fire was blazing, screaming. And it kind of was frightening.
Strange thing is, I remember at the time, yeah, I definitely distinctly remember at the time, taking my hand and rubbing my face like this. It felt like I was sweating. Later discovered that it wasn't even sweat. It got so hot in there that people's skin was actually peeling.
The way in which people were screaming and laying hurt, broken limbs, it was a terrible time.
I smashed my hip, my ankle. I got burns all over the place.
This is all that remains of the three-storey house where nearly 100 young West Indians were celebrating at an all-night birthday party for two young friends.
It was very early on a Sunday morning when I received a telephone call that there'd been a fire. When I got there, though, I saw that the house had been badly burned. I went to the back of the house and saw what looked like a person or two people looking out of an upstairs window. In fact, that's what they were doing. A short while later, I went into the house and very carefully went on the various floors, up the staircase that was very badly burned, and saw the clusters of two or three, what had been people, who were not much more than charcoal fused together. And of course the person or persons that were looking out of the upstairs window, when you got up there, you realised that it was the bottom half of their bodies were totally burned, and it was absolutely horrifying.
When we got there, look, I'm going to break out in a sweat. The smell of that house. They were still just bringing the bodies out. Well, I mean, a lot of people around there knew me. And they saw and said, "What happened, Miss Phoenix? What happened in there? What happened?" So I tell them I said, "I don't know what happened, but the police is asking," and I told them what the police is asking. I said, "Try and find find people who've been to the party, because there's a lot of dead people in there, and they said they're badly burned. They're going to have to identify them."
At the time, all I knew it was a fire in a black house. That's what I was told. So I went down to the hospital, and the children were arriving. My first thought was, God, what's happened?
I was assigned to one particular girl who was burnt from the waist down. She didn't realise how serious her injuries were, I don't think. And obviously, you try not to communicate that to somebody who is that seriously injured. And she was absolutely mortified that she might not be able to sit her O-levels. She was coming up to do her O-level exams. I wish she'd lived.
The dead girl was Yvonne Ruddock. It was her 16th birthday party. A total of 13 youngsters, most of them under 16, were killed. News of their deaths stunned black communities across the country, most notably in the town of Rugby, where a local boy, Humphrey Brown, was discovered to be among the dead.
The news came through on the Sunday that there were fatalities and that one or two of the young people couldn't be found, and that Humphrey was among those. Then later that day, we all got together and we picked up the news. And I must tell you, I have never felt a numbness of a community as we felt that Sunday afternoon. Young people just stood and wept, and it was just very sad. They were just cut off in their prime. They didn't do anything to anybody. What, 15, 16, 17? Didn't even live no life. What can I say?
But few outside the black community seemed to recognize the scale of the tragedy, and some showed a callous indifference.
We went for a drink afterwards because we needed a drink. We'd been there from 8:30 that morning. This was nearly closing time, so it must have been 10 o'clock or thereabouts. And as we sat down, me with my large brandy, which I felt I definitely needed, I heard somebody say, "Well, it don't really matter, does it? They're only black." And I was I knocked a table over. I had my hands around the bloke's throat, and I had to be pulled off.
There were people who were living in and around Lewisham who had the most racist views that you could imagine. I mean, the most awful letters, vitriolic letters were written, suggesting that it was a pity that Moore didn't die.
This letter came to the door, and it says, "A. Gooding." So I thought, well, more or less, it's one of his schoolmates from the school, because he used to go to Forest Hill Boys. And anyhow, I was shaking like anything, very nervous, but I opened the letter, And when I opened this letter now, this letter was telling me that it was a great day when all the niggers went up in smoke.
In this atmosphere, it was easy to conclude that the fire was the result of a racial attack.
We know it's a bomb.
People were saying that when the police arrived, they'd found the remnants of a firebomb and they'd covered it over. and that that was what had happened, that the house had been firebombed.
The rumour that was circulating initially when I first got to the scene of the fire was that somebody, a white person, had thrown a bottle, or somebody described it as, I think, a petrol bomb, through the window, and as a consequence of that, the fire had occurred. Now, I mean, you knew then that that was going to create all sorts of problems.
The dispute with the police over the cause of the fire quickly escalated. It was widely believed that the fire had been started deliberately, but the police were skeptical of the racial attack theory. Instead, they suspected that the fire had been started by someone at the party itself, after an argument. Many of the fire's victims now found themselves the subject of police suspicion.